Hi, everybody. This is Bob Niels. I wanted to introduce you to PHP. Right now, you're starting to get into your first project, and we're going to kind of dive right in. But before you dive in, it's probably important to understand what PHP is and what it's not. Um, PHP is a web-based application development programming language, which means this: you're going to have to create HTML forms to interface with your user, the person using your program, and then all your code in PHP is going to be executed on a server. I found this slide, if you will, or basically website. I thought this picture right here kind of really explained it well. And I wanted to make sure that you understand this before you really start moving on to your first program. For the most part, how this works is this. You're going to have a client. The clients will be your web browser. This is the person who's going to be interfacing with your PHP program. They're going to go to a URL, all right, basically at www.cincinnati.state.edu or whatever the URL is that you're going to be using for your application, all right? And so they'll type that in, and basically it's going to go to a web server. That web server could be located anywhere in the world for the most part, just like any web server for an HTML form. Once it hits the web server, it's going to recognize that it's a .php extension, or in some cases, it could be a .html extension that we'll talk about here with your first programs. If it is a PHP extension that it's executing, it will go to a PHP interpreter. Well, what's that mean? It's going to interpret the language. At this point in your curriculum, I would assume you understand what a compiler is and what an interpreter is. Maybe not so much an interpreter, but at least a compiler. That before you execute a program, it needs to build or be compiled down to machine language. In .NET, it builds, and it gets compiled down to machine language, and that's actually what executes. In PHP, it gets interpreted as you actually execute the code. It's a little bit slower than other languages, but for the most part, you're not going to notice anything. But each line of code will be interpreted and then executed down a machine language. Once it's interpreted and does what it needs to do, it's going to interface with other file systems potentially, databases here in the future, a mail server, whatever. For the most part, it's going to be executing your logical code, behind the scenes code, to do what it needs to do. This logic is going to be very similar to other programming languages that you've already learned up to this point. .NET, Java, whatever it is you've taken at this point in time. We'll go through that here actually starting this week. Once that's all finished, what happens is that it then renders an HTML document back to the web server, and that's what the client sees. So if you take other web-based application classes, this is probably not something that's new to you. However, if you haven't yet, this is new to you. The analogy here is that the Windows form is your HTML form. The Windows form, when you click a button, it goes behind the scenes and executes its code. In a web form situation where we have HTML, we're going to build on that form, press a button again, and it's going to go to the web server to execute the behind-the-scenes code. And then it's going to re-render back an HTML document back to the client. This is the same analogy that basically you're putting out the output to your labels on your Windows form. Does that make sense, hopefully? Hope you're all saying yes. That's how this works. So what we have to learn is, number one, how to send the information to the web server, how to pass information to the web server. When I say information, data back and forth, and how to kind of go through all that and kind of control when we go back to the web server versus when we're actually on the client. And so you'll kind of see that when we dive into PHP. It's actually pretty simple, just a little bit different. Hopefully this video here kind of helps you kind of get started with this. I'm going to have this particular web page available to you in the course. You can go and review it if you like. And there's other places to go review a little bit how PHP works. But for the most part, it's just that simple, all right? Once again, we're going to build an HTML form that's going to then be sent to the web server. We're going to execute some behind-the-scenes PHP code that's going to look very logical, very similar in some aspects to other languages you've already taken. We can interface with a database, file systems, other programs, whatever it is, and then it comes back and re-renders back to HTML. So it's important that you remember your HTML from that class, specifically form-based HTML. As I put in the instructions, you probably need to go back and review that if you don't know how to do it. We're going to have another video here shortly that will kind of go through that one more time for you at a very high level, but specifically the things we need to know about on how to interface with PHP. All right? So anyway, welcome to PHP. Let's get started. I think you're going to enjoy it once you dive into it.